So I want to welcome everybody to the fourth episode of DABEL Tech Talks. This is my fourth pilot episode. One of these days, I'll stop piloting it and getting it correctly. One of these days. I have with me today a special guest. Her name is Brooke Smith. She is a senior technical recruiter. But first, just a little bit about DABEL. Again, my name is Dale Bondanza. I own a company by the name of DAB Enterprises, LLC. We specialize in helping companies obtain their next tier of success despite the forces set against them through a passionate focus on people, process, and technology in that order. Don't get it wrong. If you need our assistance, please check out our website at dabenterprisesllc.com and reach out to us today. We would welcome the opportunity to help you. And Brooke, why don't we hear a little bit about yourself? Let me stop sharing my screen there so everybody can see us both. There you go. Good morning.
Good morning. Yeah. So I have been recruiting since 2007. I started in the pharmaceutical healthcare engineer. I moved to South America for a while, and then as well as, overseas to Spain, where I learned Spanish, and I taught for the Spanish government as well as some places in South America and did some translations of documents. So once I became fluent in Spanish, I came back to the US again and continued healthcare recruiting. Then, as we all know, the pandemic happened, and I wanted to do anything and everything. I wanted to do anything and everything to get out of healthcare. So I started tech recruiting, and I love it so much. It's the best thing that ever happened to me. So yeah, that's cool. Just a little bit about me. And I've been doing this for about 2 years. So.
Okay. And where are you based, Brooke?
Tampa.
Okay. So having the Spanish skills would be very helpful over here on the East Coast of Florida, but I'm sure they're helpful over there in Tampa as well.
Yeah. Yep.
So today, for our audience's benefit, we're going to talk about 3 topics, and we're going to keep it pretty high level. We'll keep it conversational. Shouldn't be more than about 20 minutes, give or take. But when Brooke and I were speaking previously, she enlightened me on a few subjects, including some things relative to resumes, some interviewing techniques. And while a virtual CIO such as myself is familiar with ATS systems, obviously I've helped install them for many HR departments as an applicant tracking system. Brooke brought to my attention the world of VMS, which is something I was not familiar with. So we'll talk a little bit about that at the end. But let's start with the resumes, Brooke. You had some interesting insights on technology folks' resumes these days. So what can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I think that something that I would like to stress just for people who are looking for employment or are open to new employment is the simplicity is more, less is more, especially when it comes to tech. We want to see the meat of the resume. We don't necessarily need to see all the frills and things that make it look pretty, right? So I was just going to kind of explain what a resume should look like in the order it should be formed. And then from there, this is just an easy way for you to read a resume as well as process what's in it so that this person's resume can go to the top of the list versus the bottom, because the applicant tracking system obviously is based, and we'll get into this after, is based on an algorithm, and we need keywords and things like that in a resume. But I wanted to start with the form of how it should be formatted, and then from there kind of go into a couple other things, and then we can move on to the next. So I think the most important part is that your resume is black and white. No other colors need to be there. It really doesn't. And then also just the format of your resume. The most important thing at the top should be a professional summary of who you are, what you're looking to do, what and maybe tailor it to the position that you're applying to, or to the position that you had before or whatever. Something very important about that professional resume is that you include some technical, especially when we're dealing with tech professionals, you include some technical skills in your resume, but not too many, because there's a spot for that as well. This is mostly about who you are, your work ethic, what you bring to the table, how you can benefit a future employer, and things like that. Then after your professional summary, you want to do your professional work history. And this needs to start from some people, it's surprising to me, but I don't know why, but some people start with the oldest and go to the newest. It needs to start with the most current position and go obviously from there.
Reverse chronological order.
Yeah. So it's a good idea. Some people like to, list their positions and do a paragraph. That's not how it should look. It should be bullet points. And it should be the position, on the left-hand side with the company, as well as on the right-hand side with the dates. The dates can be numbers. They don't have to be spelled out. And then from there, 5 to 10 bullet points on each position. So just to explain that again. So on the left-hand side, you should have the company name that should be underlined as like it's a title, even though it sounds like it's weird because technical writing is different, right, than regular writing. So the company name needs to be titled, and then the position can be bolded, not titled, under the company name. From there, 5 to 10 bullet points. On the right side, your dates, and your dates should be numbers. They should not be spelled out.
Okay. So
And then,
you made me think of three things as you were explaining that, and I'll let you finish. But it's funny. You're probably the first person I've had the podcast with where you're making my wheels spin off the top of my head, because I'm putting myself in the audience's position of, I know some of the folks who are watching today are at various levels. So what you're talking about from a resume perspective and how it's laid out and formatted, does it matter whether it's somebody who's a entry-level developer or a director of delivery? Would you say it should all kind of follow the same format?
Right. It should all follow the same format. Even those C-level executives who are, they're going to understand this, and they're going to understand, okay, well, I'll add some more things to my resume. Like maybe there's a paragraph above, but then there's also included 5 to 10 bullet points under that. But it shouldn't just be a blob of writing that is like really hard to get through, because no employer is going to want to look through. They already read your professional summary. They don't want to skip down and read a bunch of different summaries of what you've done. That's amazing, great, but they want the meat of it, the technical skills that you used, the tech stacks you used. If you were in a managerial position, numbers are super, super important. How many people have you managed? If you're a people manager versus not a people manager, you want to see all those things. Percentages, right? If I've taken this team to get from productivity of 10% to 85%, show those numbers, right? Numbers are super important too, so we can see like what we've actually done and accomplished in this position. And C-level executives, they'll have resumes like this as well. They might have a paragraph above just explaining, hey, listen, I was, the CIO of this corporation for X amount of time, blah, 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 blah. But then they'll have their 10 bullet points as well. So it kind of applies to any and all positions.
And it's funny when you say bullet points. I recently had somebody make a comment on my own resume and said, well, you know how you use those little black dots, you should try black diamonds. Does it matter?
Black dots do.
Black
don't
dots.
Listen.
Okay. Do ATS, and we're going to get to this, but do ATSs care either way?
I don't think it matters, as long as the words are in there that need to be in there and what they're looking for, that like keywords based on the job position. Something else when applying to jobs is you can take the position, the job description, and pull little words out of it and put it into your resume. If you've done those things, obviously you're not going to lie about what you've done, but hey, listen, I've done this. It's awesome. Cool. Take those things out, put them into my resume, because it's going to ping based on the job description. So.
And then another comment that I picked up on that I kind of laughed at when you said black and white only. I know sometimes people will put a link, a web link in their resume because they're sending it to folks like yourself. So naturally it appears in blue.
Yeah, which is fine. That's totally, we all know that that's how a hyperlink works, right? So it's totally fine.
Okay. And then do you have a feeling on, because I've had people ask me this question before too, and I waffle on it myself, but I'd love to hear a professional recruiter's 2 cents. What about putting your picture on the top?
I don't think it matters either way. It depends on the employer you're working with and who's hiring, because some people might like that personal touch. Some people don't. They're like, okay, this is, a waste of time or whatever. Like, I don't care. I'm going to meet this person anyways when I interview them, so it's okay. The only thing I was going to say about the resumes with the black and white thing is, there are positions like UX designers or people who are graphic designers. They're probably going to make their resume a little bit better. And that's different because they're looking for a design position. So they might want to put their little flair to it. But either way, like I've had graphic and UX designers and people in that realm of things, creativity, still get positions of black and white resumes over people who have a frilly resume. So it's really what's in the resume versus what it looks like. But it obviously needs to look professional and well done. And that's why I'm kind of explaining the format it should be in. So like I said before, like the summary to start, then the positions, and we kind of got into that, right? Then after the position should be education. Some people like to put education at the top of their resume. It should not be. It should be under your work history. And then your certifications as well. Your education and your certifications can be intermingled in there. And then anything like volunteer work, some employers really like to see extracurricular activities and things like that. Some don't, it doesn't really matter. But if you want to do that, that also falls to the bottom of the resume.
Okay.
So,
okay. All good stuff. At the point, okay, so now Brooke has reviewed my resume. I've made it, well, even before Brooke, I made it through the ATS. I got to the actual recruiter. Brooke said, yep, this person looks like somebody I want to speak to. So now you reach out to them as the recruiter and say, hey, Dale, I'd like to talk to you for an interview. If Dale was your client instead of the person you were interviewing, what would you say to Dale as to help him prep for that interview?
So you being my client or you being my candidate, the person who's applying for the position?
Well, in this case, I guess I have to be the client. So yes, if you're prepping me for an interview with an employer that you're searching for, or I'm just, somebody on the street, because again, the variety of the folks who are watching right now are, they're interviewing for positions. So what should they be doing? So you have
Awesome.
a vast audience of clients right now.
Yeah. So now the employer so my client is going to interview you, and now I'm prepping you for the interview process. Okay. Yeah. So first off, most interviews are virtual right now. There are certain things when it comes to like government positions and things like that, they like to see you in person. Because the pandemic is, we've announced that it's done.
Right.
They're liking to do more in-person interviews.
Okay.
But for the most part, people will probably stick to Zoom or Teams or whatever virtual interviews for a while. The first thing I always say is, no matter how amazing you think you are, be there 5 to 10 minutes early, even if you're sitting there and the employer is just not there yet and you're just waiting around and bored. Like, do it. There are always technical difficulties that might happen. This is like the people might be like, oh, I'm above this, I already know this, but it never fails. Like, be there early, make sure your microphone is working properly, make sure that your video is working properly, make sure your internet isn't spacing out or being weird. Things like that. Dress professionally, even though it's Zoom. You'd be so surprised. I've had C-level executives like wear a sweatshirt to an interview, and I'm like, oh my gosh, please, like, you're the one that's trying to get the position here. You're not the one that's interviewing, but also you're interviewing your employer as well, right? So
right.
That's something to think about. So just like dress, those are the simple, easy tasks. I personally, to my candidates who are applying to positions who interview with my clients, I send them out 4 to 5 documents to prep the day before, and I ask them to do their homework. Like I said, there are people who think, hey, listen, I have done this a million times. I know how to interview. I've interviewed other people, but these documents really, really help you. The one that I wanted to kind of focus on, it's called the STAR document, and anybody can Google it if you want. It's a strategic way to answer situational based interview questions. So in most interviews, employers are going to be asking situational based questions, whether it's workplace situations or home based situations, whatever they might be, personal, professional, whatever. And when we get nervous, we tend, no matter who we are and how great of a public speaker we might be, we tend to talk way too much. And so it's super important to read this document. It's like a little review, and it goes from like point A, B, C, D, just how to fluidly answer a question. And then once you've answered the question, lay it on the table and be done and kind of walk away from it. And then from there, the person can listen and, ask questions. To me, I will tell you, and this is not even like an exaggeration, 98% of people who use this document will have a second interview requested of them. The people that don't end up doing exactly what I said that they think they're not going to do, and talk in circles, talk for too long, ask questions that have nothing to do with what the question was asked of them, just because they're trying to fill and they get nervous and they might forget. We continue to talk, things like that, So this just gives you an A, B, C, D, very easy formatted way to answer a question. And it's called the STAR doc, STAR.
Can you remind me? I know S is situational, if I remember correctly. What's the rest of it stand
Task,
for?
and then
Situational,
application. Yeah,
task.
it depends on which one, because sometimes it varies like with how they say it online,
Okay.
but it's situation, task, and then like application of the task, and then to review what you kind of went over. So,
Okay.
but it depends. Like if you Google it, there could be like a couple different ways, but mostly it's the same thing. It's just how
Yeah.
to, fluidly answer these questions.
And I can agree with you on the employer side, as having been an executive for the last 10 years myself, can't tell you the number of people who I speak to that just have, diarrhea of the mouth. It's just like on and on and on. And I think, this is something you and I have talked about in the past, to say that nothing worse than getting to the end of what's supposed to be a 30-minute interview that you think is a good thing when it turns into a 45-minute or a 60-minute interview. Like, hey, I was engaging. It was like, no, you were just going on and on and on. A question that should have been a star method of here's what I did, here's the action, here was the result. Bing, bang, boom. Should have been a 5-minute question. You turned it into a 20-minute diatribe, soapbox of answering the question, pretty much like I'm doing now.
Right.
But that's, you got to know when, and I use the expression all the time, less is more. You don't want a yes, no answer. You're not on the witness stand, but answer the question, be direct. And then, like you said, I like how you said, just kind of leave it on the table. And
Right, because there will be a time at the end of your interview where you can ask the employer questions. I mean, you're interviewing them just as much as they're interviewing you, especially if you really want this position, because
right.
this has to, fit into your family, your work-life balance. This has to fit into culturally what you're looking for. There's more to a job than just like what it's on the job description, right? And we know that as recruiters. People might think we don't, but we do. And I think the most important thing is just to remember that, like, you can ask those questions, but there's a time and place to ask those questions, not in the middle when they're asking you. And something that I've also noticed just in the past couple of years, with people getting nervous and layoffs and things like that, they're really eager and they're excited to get a new job, and they're pressured because they might not have one anymore, when they know that they're worth like way more than have been given, or if they've been laid off or whatever. And so people kind of try to direct the interview versus letting the employer direct the interview. Let them lead and you just follow. And then at the end, there's a time when you can lead and ask questions. And another thing, like, other than, you said diarrhea of the mouth, like when people continue to just like talk. Another thing is, some people, when they get nervous, they'll cut somebody off. And I've heard this a lot. I monitor a lot of my interviews, and sometimes my heart just sinks. And I'm like, okay, I'm just going to pretend like I didn't hear that, because they'll cut off the person that's interviewing them and not let them finish a sentence. And it's like, no, that's like not okay. So just little things like that. That's why the STAR document is so helpful, because it really does be like, hey, listen, take a step back, humble yourself a little bit, even though you know you're good at what you do. Amazing. But you don't have to prove that right now, because you can do that when you get the job. Right now, it's just talk to the person, explain, what they've asked of you, and then lead at the end and let them lead throughout the interview and guide you through it.
Okay. So. Yeah, good advice. And again, I think what I've experienced personally, and I can relate to folks who are watching too, again, as somebody who's interviewed literally thousands of people, what I've personally learned when I'm sitting in the interviewee chair is exactly what you're saying, that the reason you want to accelerate the interviewer through their questions is, especially in the last, I would say 10, 15 years, it's become very equally important for you to interview the employer and ask them questions about culture or management structure or hierarchy, or, can you give me a day in the life of, and if you just keep talking and talking, you don't ever get to ask those questions that will help you make up your mind as to whether or not this is somebody you really want to work for. And again, I really see that today, because we have 4 different generations in the workforce, from boomers to zoomers, and and the younger folks, and I can say this as somebody with a little bit of snow on the side of the mountain, that, when you're interviewing, millennials or Gen Z folks, which is basically anybody between the ages of, 21 and 42 at this point, they're going to ask very different questions than Gen X folks or even boomers are going to ask in interviews. And you really have to be prepared for that as an interviewer. one of these days we should give the opposite class on not just being the interviewee, but being the interviewer. So keep that in mind for a future podcast.
Right, totally. And just like you kind of were explaining, it kind of just made me think too, just be okay with silence. That's
well, we were just at the point where we're getting to, so we talked about resumes, we talked about interviewing. I think the last part is really so critical for people to understand is, because I've read a lot of statistics lately that, 85% of people are using LinkedIn as their primary method of searching for jobs or searching for information about other companies. And while that's great, I don't know that people necessarily understand that when they're applying to jobs, that at least, in my opinion, feel free to correct me on this, at least the first couple reviews of your documents, resumes, cover letters, etc., are never being done by humans. They're always being done by ATS systems, robots, software, whatever you want to call it, AI in a lot of cases. So when folks hear of an applicant tracking system, can you kind of explain what that is and what that ATS is doing?
Yeah, so I'm going to explain kind of because it will make more sense if I explain like a VMS versus an ATS so people can understand. So an ATS is an applicant tracking system. A VMS is a vendor management system. If I'm a recruiter working for a staffing company, I'm working as a vendor or a client, right? So an ATS is between the applicant and directly with the organization. Okay, that's what an applicant tracking system is. So I'm an applicant, I'm applying to Costco, for an example. I apply to Costco's website or through LinkedIn or wherever, as long as it's bringing me to Costco, I'm an applicant and I'm communicating directly with the organization I'm applying to. A VMS is a vendor management system. So it's between I apply through a recruiter or give them my resume or whatever. The recruiter takes my resume and applies to that position for me. But they don't do it through the ATS. They do it through a vendor management system, which is between the staffing company and the organization versus the applicant directly. So there's two ways to do it. If you're applying, if you see a job posted online and you are working with a recruiter, don't apply to it by yourself. People will say, oh, recruiters say this to me because they make money off me. But in reality, it goes like this. If you're applying through the ATS and a VMS, you're going to be rejected because it's showing that you've applied twice, and it pings the system and just throws it out of there. So you can decide if you have a position you want to apply to without a recruiter. I would never tell my boss I'm telling you this, but apply to it by yourself. If you feel like you're going to get there faster, that's fine. But don't do both. Don't double dip when it comes to those things. Make sure you decide which one. If you trust your recruiter, have your recruiter do it. To be completely honest, ours usually go to the top of the list because the VMS is controlled by an MSP, which is a managed service provider. So this managed service provider is paid by Costco or whoever the client is. They sift through these resumes, and it is a person, and then they choose the best ones. They're the ones that are sat in front of the hiring manager. The MSP is like the little middleman to filter through everything before it gets to the hiring manager. And if you are working with a recruiter, they're working with an MSP, which is a third party managed system or service provider, whatever, who, if that makes any sense, I kind of was talking in circles, but it's good sometimes to apply through a recruiter because you will get to the top of the list a lot faster than if you apply through an ATS. Some companies don't use vendors. They just don't. So you have to apply through an ATS. And that's why what I was explaining when it comes to resumes is so fundamental because they're working on an algorithm. So like kind of I explained to you the other day when we were on the phone, say I applied to Costco today and you applied to Costco 3.5 years ago. Your resume, if it pings in the system, it's going to go to the top, even though you applied 3.5 years ago. It doesn't matter. People think, oh, fresh is the best, right? I applied today. They're going to see my resume first. Just like if you email somebody, it's at the top of your email list. It doesn't work like an email. It works through an algorithm. It's math, essentially, right? So if they like it, they put it to the top, no matter how many years ago it was. And you can that's why sometimes people will be like, it's so weird. I applied to this position like a year ago and I got a call about it. And it's like, because your resume pinged something that they need for whatever they're, hiring for, and they put you at the top of the list. So all in all, the foundation, the most important part is your resume. As much as people are like, oh, a resume is like, we should just there's so many debate going on in the world that we should just be throwing resumes to the side. But in all reality, it's not going to happen. And the reason is because we don't have enough human beings to be able to be like, oh, well, I can just interview 15 people in person and not have to deal with a resume. It's a lot easier to look at a piece of paper, sift through it. Okay, yes or no, put it in the yes or the no pile and move on to the next. We have to have that first impression and see. It's not just a resume is not just what you can do. It's to show your writing skills. If you can spell, you would be so surprised with how many resumes I see of C-level executives and they cannot spell. And I'm like, or their grammar is, I taught English for a long time. So I'm kind of a stickler when it comes to grammatical errors and things like that. And not to, put myself on a pedestal, but there's a reason why my resumes succeed more than some people I work with. And that is because I'm a stickler when it comes to grammatical errors, the format of my resume. It is very, very rare. Maybe one time in the last 2 years, maybe two, that I've sent a resume without changing it to an employer. I would not do that because they're not going to get anywhere with it. I have to fix the mistakes. And I always send the resume, and a recruiter, no matter who you're working with, they should always be sending you whatever they're submitting to the employer before your interview. So if they're changing the resume, which they should be doing, they should then say, okay, I'm going to send you the copy I sent to the employer. That way, when you're interviewing, it's not like you're looking at something that the employer's not seeing. You're seeing exactly even the format of how they formatted it for you. Some clients need it formatted a certain way, even if we like it a different way. So we have to change it for the client specifically. So It's nice to see that. So you're not like in the blue or, oh my gosh, like what's going on? You're seeing the same thing. And you can
Are there 2 or 3 high level things? And I know we're getting close to time, but are there 2 or 3 high level things that you're saying that you kind of see? Because one of them that kind of jumped to my mind as you were talking through that is it's something I've struggled with personally in the past, even on my own resume, is tense of verbs. Past tense versus present tense. Your current role in theory is in present tense, and then everything else is in past tense. But I've also heard the opposite. I've heard everything should be in past tense. So maybe that's one of them. But are there 2 or 3 other things that people should really hone in on?
I think just like I said, the formatting is very important.
Sure.
I would say that's number one. Okay. I would say less is more. And I would say it's okay to have a long resume. Some people are like, oh, if it's not one page, I won't look at it. If you're a C-level executive who's been in the workforce for 30 years, you're not going to have a one-page resume. And if you do, there's a problem. So that means so it's okay.
That's funny.
Don't stick to those things that we've heard. Formatting, less is more. What I'm saying is just don't be wordy in your resume. Bullet points are key. You can do summaries and things like that, but bullet points are very important. Stick to what you know. There are a lot of people who will put things in resumes because it sounds good, not because they know it. Don't do that. If somebody calls out a bullet point and asks a question about it, be prepared to answer it, and be prepared to answer it because you actually did it, not because you Googled what it's saying. And also I think the biggest thing is just make sure you actually prepare for your interview. No matter how great you think you are and how many interviews you've been in, prepare for it. It'll really help you, and it will help with the nerves and, take notes. If you're people are like, they think they need to be staring at the screen the whole time. If you're looking down at your notes, that's okay because you've done your homework and you'll be rewarded for doing that,
Right.
So I don't know. I think that I hope this helps because I know that so there's a trillion recruiters in the world and people work with them all the time. And I know people have really bad taste in their mouth from some of them. And then some people have really good taste in their mouth from others. Just depends on, who you're working with. And yeah, I would make sure also you're sticking with a recruiter who really understands your skill set. Some recruiters might say, okay, yeah, I read your resume. I can apply you for this position. but do you understand, especially in the technology world, does your recruiter understand tech? Because I can promise you that 75% of them don't. They don't understand the difference between what a PM does and a BSA does. And that's going to be a problem if you're a PM, So
as a guy who's around a lot of PMOs, I can completely empathize with what you're saying.
Right. So just make sure your recruiter knows. Like, those are just some things I wanted to add at the end. Just make sure your recruiter knows tech. And they might try to convince you, hey, work with me because I'm the best, but quiz them. I mean, you're the one that knows. So quiz them and see if they know. And if they know, you'll get a lot further because they'll know their client better too.
Okay, very good. And if people want to reach out to you after this podcast, Brooke, can they do that, or what's the best place they can do that?
Yeah, I can do my personal email address. I'm not going to give my work one. I'll give my work one after I talk to them. But my personal email, I can just I can say it too.
Yeah, you can say because if you drop in the chat, they won't see it anyway. So
okay, yeah, it's just Brooke, Brook. There's no E at the end of my name, and then Smith, which is super easy, 126@gmail.com. So if anybody has any questions or they want to work with me too, they can feel free. I love, I work nationally, not just in the state of Florida. So I have accounts.
Good to know. Good to know. And you're available on LinkedIn too, I'm guessing, obviously.
Yep.
Okay. So,
yep.
All right, great. Well, that was a great conversation. I like to keep it to just, under the category of less is more. I like to keep it to kind of just the meat. So that was good high level stuff. If folks have additional questions, feel free to reach out to Brooke, as she mentioned, on her email or on LinkedIn. And let me just throw up my kind of outro slide for us. And where is that outro slide? There we go. And again, Brooke, I just want to thank you so much for being on the 4th pilot episode of DABEL Tech Talks. And any last minute points that you want to throw out for folks, or are you all good?
I just want to say thank you for having me. It's been great, and you're amazing to work with. And if anybody is considering Dale to consult for them, I think he's number one. So
thanks. Certainly not biased. I appreciate that. Well, thank you so much, Brooke. Hold on just 1 minute. I'll be right back to you in the waiting room.
Okay.